At first light, Sergeant Jack Chen moved across Arlington marble with ritual precision, his boots clicking in perfect rhythm through the cold hush. 21 steps, pause, turn, repeat. As dawn mist drifted low between rows of white headstones, and a silent crowd watched him the way people watched a flame in a chapel. Not speaking, not shifting, not willing to break what had been entrusted to that morning. The hill breathed in gray and silver. Thin ribbons of fog curled along the grass, touched the bases of stones, and peeled away as the first slant of sun reached the upper rows. Every headstone stood in formation, shoulder to shoulder, rank without noise, name without argument, each one carrying the clean geometry of sacrifice. Jack's path cut through that stillness like a metronome for memory. He did not hurry. He did not drift. He measured distance by discipline and time by duty, and as he crossed the black mat, his face remained carved into the same unreadable mask that had steadied under mortar flashes years earlier. To the crowd, he looked ceremonial, almost sculpted. Inside, his awareness tracked every movement on the hill, every footfall near the lane, every child at the edge of a curb, every hand lifted with a phone and then lowered again out of instinctive respect. His uniform held no flaw. The blue wool coat sat square against his chest, each seam aligned as if drafted with a ruler. Brass buttons caught the thin morning light and returned it in hard points. His white gloves were pristine, fingertips steady against the walnut stock of the M14, resting in practice command. The kepi hat angled exactly, not a degree surrendered to wind. His trousers broke cleanly over boots polished to a mirror shine. And in that mirrored black, there were reflected fragments of sky, marble, and moving cloud, the living and the remembered, carried together across leather. Every crease looked sharp enough to cut glass. Every line said the same thing. This was not performance. This was vow. By 6:07 a.m., the flag above the hill had begun to snap in measured bursts as the breeze strengthened, and the sound carried over the stones like a distant drumbeat. Families stood in small clusters near designated paths, coats zipped to the throat against the autumn bite. A man with an oxygen tube rested both hands on the top of a cane and kept his gaze fixed on Jack's turnpoint, as if anchoring himself to it. Two elderly Marines, shoulders bent but bearing still proud, wore unit pins that flashed when they shifted. One had a purple heart cap tucked under his arm, the other held his brim with both hands at his chest. A mother adjusted a child's scarf, then stilled her own hands when the boots struck marble again. A high school group that had arrived with chatter now stood with phones lowered, faces scrubbed free of boredom by the gravity of what surrounded them. A nurse guided a wheelchair between rows with careful, practiced turns, pausing when the sentinel approached so the passage remained clear. Near the lower path, a little girl in a navy coat clutched folded program cards against her chest with both hands, as if paper could be armor. Her braids were tied with white ribbons that trembled in the wind. She stayed beside an older woman with silver hair and a posture of controlled grief, but her eyes kept finding Jack at each turn, drawn to the certainty of his movement. Children often watch that way, first curious, then quiet, then changed without knowing the vocabulary for it. Jack noticed her every cycle. He noticed everyone. The old guard had trained his body to make repetition look effortless. Combat had trained his mind to treat stillness as a field of variables. He mapped entrances, exits, lines of sight, distance to stone, distance to people, distance to harm. He did it without moving a muscle beyond the ritual cadence. The morning held the scent of wet grass and cold stone, a clean mineral edge that belonged to places where names outlasted voices. There was no traffic noise here, only the cadence of boots, a flag's sharp report, and the occasional soft rustle of fabric as mourners shifted weight from one foot to the other. Jack's rifle remained steady as carved granite, his jaw, marked by a pale line that started just below the ear and faded toward the chin, looked almost colorless in the dawn light. Most visitors read it as age or accident and looked away. Those who recognized shrapnel scars recognized the silence that came with them and looked away for a different reason. Jack gave neither group a reaction. His duty at this hour was not to be seen as a man with history. His duty was to be the visible edge of a promise made long before he arrived. He reached the 21st step. Halt, turn, shoulder, heel, pivot, breath, all in one unbroken command chain. The movement was exact and severe and oddly merciful, because exactness removed all uncertainty from the space he guarded. In a world loud with improvisation, this patch of marble and grass obeyed a law older than any voice in the crowd. The sentinel would not cut corners. The sentinel would not abbreviate reverence to accommodate convenience. The sentinel would not let weather, fatigue, attention, or neglect dilute the contract between the living and the fallen. Jack knew that contract the way he knew his own pulse. He had carried it across oceans and deserts before he carried it here. He passed again, and the crowd breathed with him without realizing it. Some counted the steps beneath their breath. Some mouthed the numbers and stopped, ashamed to intrude. A veteran in a heavy tan coat removed his cap and held it against his heart, gaze fixed not on Jack's face, but on the line of motion itself, as if the march made visible all the brothers he had never properly buried. A father lifted his son so the boy could see over shoulders. The child's fingers curled into the fabric of his father's jacket and stayed there. A pair of visiting teachers stood with clipboards hanging at their sides, forgotten, while their students learned the first lesson Arlington ever taught. Memory required structure, and structure required guardians willing to disappear into it. The mist thinned. Headstones farther up the slope came into sharp definition. Long ranks bending with the hill like disciplined battalions held at eternal rest. Sunlight widened, caught on marble edges, and cast slender shadows that pointed downhill toward the path Jack walked. In that widening light, his uniform appeared even darker, the blue almost black, a moving silhouette of authority against stone white enough to hurt the eyes. He had stood in uniform stained by dust, rain, and cordite, and he had worn this one with the same seriousness because both garments carried the same debt. Ceremony did not erase war. It translated war into an act the nation could witness without turning away. He reached the turn again. Halt, turn, return. A woman in civilian hospice scrubs, likely coming off a night shift, stood near the outer rail with tired eyes and did not blink for the length of one full pass. A teenager with earbuds looped around his neck removed them entirely and folded them into his pocket. Two middle-aged men who had arrived arguing over directions fell silent and stood shoulder to shoulder without speaking. An elderly couple in matching windbreakers rested their palms against each other, fingers interlaced, and watched with tears they did not wipe away. None of them came to the same grief. None of them carried the same story. Yet here, for these minutes, all of them accepted one shared rule. No one would rush what this place required. Jack's breathing stayed controlled, low in the diaphragm, calibrated to cadence so the body never stole from the ritual. His shoulders remained level. His gaze stayed fixed at the prescribed point, though his peripheral vision stitched together the full arc of the scene. Slope, rail, aisle, faces, movement, weather. He understood, with a veteran's unsentimental clarity, that danger rarely announced itself with drama. It arrived through impatience, distraction, entitlement, ignorance. The Sentinel's first defense was posture. The second was awareness. The third, if needed, was command. But this morning, at least in these opening minutes, the hill held. At the edge of one row, fresh-cut earth showed darker than the surrounding ground, a recent rectangle now sealed and smoothed, the grass still settling around it. A temporary marker rested there for final arrangements, and floral tributes had been laid with care, ribbons stiff with dew. Jack did not glance directly at it while on the mat. Protocol ruled his eyes as surely as his feet. Even so, he knew where it was in relation to every step, knew the shape of the ground, knew which families had lingered longest near that line before dawn. His duty was public and impersonal by design. The weight he carried beneath it was neither. The flag cracked once, hard. A bird lifted from a nearby tree and crossed the white rows in a clean diagonal. Somewhere farther down the hill, a maintenance cart stopped and went quiet, driver waiting respectfully for a pass to complete before moving again. Jack felt the cold through the sole of each boot, felt the minute texture change where polished surface met matte edge, and used those cues as anchors. 21 steps. Pause. Turn. 21 steps. The sequence had been repeated by sentinels before him and would be repeated long after his own final march. That continuity was the point. Individual names mattered. Ritual held them together. A chaplain in black overcoat arrived near the rail and removed his gloves, tucking them into a pocket before clasping his hands in front of him. A grounds worker paused with a rake, lowered it to the grass, and stood at attention until Jack completed another cycle. The little girl in the navy coat shifted her weight and looked down at the folded cards in her hands, then back up, as if checking that the world still contained one thing that moved exactly the way it was supposed to move. Jack passed her line of sight again, boots striking marble with that measured click that carried farther than speech. He reached the 21st step once more and turned, and for a heartbeat the whole hill seemed arranged around that single pivot. Flag above, marble below, witnesses between, history in every direction. No one cheered, no one clapped. Reverence at Arlington had no appetite for applause. It asked for attention, and this crowd gave it fully. Jack resumed the march, unflinching, unwavering, the sentinel's cadence holding the morning together while the nation remembered through him. Then the hill heard engines. The sound did not belong to Arlington's morning grammar. It came low and expensive, a layered growl of tuned motors climbing the restricted service grade from the southern axis, too fast for cemetery pace, too confident for sacred ground. Jack finished his 21st step, paused, turned, and saw the first black SUV clear the bend where only funeral traffic was authorized. A second followed so close their bumpers nearly touched. A third rolled behind them with hazard lights flashing, as if impatience could be rebranded as emergency. People on the lower path shifted backward on instinct. The nurse with the wheelchair pulled hard to the side and braced the chair with one hand on each handle. One of the elderly Marines squared his shoulders as if confronting a remembered blast wave and planted his feet in place. High school students who had gone silent moments earlier looked from vehicle to sentinel and then to the fresh stone line near the lane, trying to understand why ordinary rules had just broken in full daylight. No one spoke above a whisper. The boots on marble stopped sounding like ritual and started sounding like warning. The lead SUV cut its wheel too sharply and climbed half onto the soft edge beside the newest burial section, close enough that wet turf compressed beneath the tire. A cemetery attendant in a green jacket raised both hands and shouted for the driver to halt. The driver kept rolling, creeping forward in short thrusts, guided by someone in the passenger seat pointing through the windshield toward the media sight line above the terrace. Jack tracked angle, speed, distance to civilians, distance to Stone, distance to the little girl in the navy coat, now standing rigid beside the older woman. He did not break posture. He did not move from cadence. He marked threat lines the way he once mapped alleyways in provinces where hesitation cost lives. The rear passenger door opened before the vehicle fully settled. Victor Sloan stepped out in a charcoal suit cut so sharply it looked armored, silver cufflinks catching the morning light in hard flashes. He was broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, and practiced at being obeyed without repeating himself. A videographer climbed out behind him, with a shoulder rig already recording. A legal aide in a camel overcoat unfolded a tablet, scanning permits as if paper could overwrite protocol. Sloan took one look at the burial lane, one look at Jack in ceremonial blue, and pointed as though directing furniture placement at a gala. "Move the toy soldier and clear my media route." His voice carried farther than he intended. It cut across marble, grass, and grief with the flat authority of someone used to private gates opening before he reached them. The crowd went still in a way different from reverence. This stillness held anger. The father, with the small boy, lowered the child to the ground and placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. The chaplain's jaw tightened. The hospice nurse closed her eyes once, then opened them and watched without blinking. Sloan didn't see any of it. He was staring at the lane, calculating camera background, sun angle, and donor optics. He gestured to the driver with two sharp fingers, the universal sign for inch forward. The SUV obeyed, tire turning another quarter rotation along the edge near the newest marker. Dirt pressed under tread. Dew dark grass flattened. What he did not know could have filled a battlefield briefing. The man he had called a prop had carried a wounded radio operator down a rocky draw outside Kunda's while rounds snapped at ankle height. Behind the white gloves and immaculate seams stood a Bronze Star recipient whose right ear still rang at night from a mortar tube that landed 3 meters short in Syria. The pale scar at Jack's jaw began with hot metal and ended with a promise made in triage. If he lived, he would spend that life defending names that no longer could defend themselves. And this ground was not abstract to Jack Chen, but personal terrain. Jack reached his turn point and pivoted. And on that return pass, his gaze crossed the new Headstone line for a legal fraction of a second. Whitaker, D. The letters were cut clean and deep, shadowed by low sun, impossible to mistake even at distance, because that surname had once been shouted across smoke, while 2 men hauled each other through debris. His chest remained steady. His hands remained exact on the rifle. No one outside his skin could see the shock strike. Inside, memory detonated with no sound. Daniel Whitaker laughing through dust. Daniel Whitaker slapping a deck of bent playing cards against a helmet and saying he had never met a worse bluffer than Chen. Daniel Whitaker moving first when the secondary blast came. The little girl in the navy coat clutched her folded program cards tighter and stared at the stone bearing that same name. The older woman beside her drew one arm around the child's shoulders, chin trembling once before discipline reclaimed it. Jack saw the relation at a glance. Same eyes, same set of jaw. The hidden variable was no longer hidden from him. The outsider wanted a camera corridor. The lane he was forcing cut through Staff Sergeant Daniel Whitaker's final honors. Sloan took 3 steps toward the cemetery attendant and snapped, "You're wasting everyone's time. We have authorization for coverage and a schedule to keep." The attendant answered, voice shaking but firm. "Sir, this lane is active for a military burial detail. You need to move back now." Sloan didn't even look at him. I said, "Move the parade prop and clear the line." Murmurs rippled through families, then tightened into silence again as Jack's boots struck marble in measured cadence. Each click carried like a metronome over rising outrage. Externally, he remained carved from stone, face unreadable, eyes fixed by protocol. Internally, every combat circuit lit at once. Protect mourners, protect procession route, protect child at curb, de-escalate if possible, interdict if necessary. He measured the SUV's idle creep and the exact space between grille and stone border. He counted the driver's hands. He catalogued the videographer's path. He stored Sloane's words with the precision of sworn testimony. By 6:11 a.m., even the wind seemed to wait. A grounds worker stepped beside the lane with both palms raised. The legal aid moved to block him with a forearm and a rehearsed smile that failed immediately under the weight of the setting. One of the elderly Marines took one step forward, then stopped when he saw Jack complete another pass, as if the sentinel's unbroken cadence itself issued a command. "Hold your line. Let duty answer first." Sloane looked at Jack again, this time with open contempt, and flicked his fingers at the driver. "Forward." The SUV nudged ahead. Jack did not break rhythm yet. He reached 21 steps, paused, turned, and returned through a corridor of held breath where dozens of witnesses watched a collision between purchase status and earned duty approaching by inches. Every person there could feel it, even those who did not know regulations or rank. They knew the shape of disrespect when it stood in polished shoes beside a fresh grave. To understand why Jack's posture stayed so controlled in that tightening lane, you had to understand the architecture beneath it, because discipline at the tomb was never ornamental and never accidental. It was built from repetition, yes, but also from memory under pressure, from decisions made in places where one wrong estimate wrote condolences instead of reports. Jack Chen was 30 years old, 6'2", shoulders broad enough to make the blue coat look like a breastplate, hair clipped close, eyes dark and unreadable from 10 feet away and hyper-focused from 10 miles within. Visitors saw polish. Veterans recognized compression. The kind forged when a man learned to carry grief without spilling it into public space. His jacket sat immaculate against a body marked by campaigns the average tourist only knew as headlines. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Syria. A bronze star pinned in a case back home, not displayed because symbols mattered most to him when attached to names. The pale scar along his jaw came from shrapnel outside Kunduz during an extraction gone sideways under layered fire. The medic who stitched him told him he was lucky. Jack never used that word for survival. He called it debt. 3 days before this morning, he had received routine assignment rosters for ceremonial support and noted a new interment in his sector, initials only in early paperwork. He had not connected it then. At Arlington, grief arrived in organized columns, and every name carried its own weather. The full stone went in at dawn. By the time sunlight hit the engraving, he had seen it from his turn line and understood exactly whose journey he was guarding. Staff Sergeant Daniel Whitaker had been his squad leader, and in the irreverent economy of deployed friendship, his loudest critic and fiercest shield. Whitaker could dismantle a rifle blindfolded and lose every card hand with theatrical confidence. On rain nights when tempers ran short and generators coughed out bad light, he used to grin and tell the team, "If we make it home, first round's on me, and Chen still can't bluff to save his life." Men laughed because he made laughter possible, where it had no right to exist. Hours before the blast that killed him, He had repeated that line over instant coffee so bitter it tasted like burnt wire. Then he moved toward danger first, not because he was fearless, but because leadership in that unit meant taking the exposed angle before anyone else had to. Jack lived because Whitaker did not. That arithmetic followed him into every formation after discharge from combat rotations. He requested old guard selection, not to stand closer to cameras or history books, but to stand where memory had structure and no one could rush the dead for convenience. Training at the tomb stripped ego down to cadence and rebuilt identity as duty. 21 steps, pause, turn, repeat. Weapon manual exact, uniform inspection merciless, awareness constant. The public saw ceremony. The men inside it understood the deeper rule. You were not there to be admired. You were there to keep faith. By the second week of October, Jack had settled into pre-dawn shifts where mist clung low and the first visitors arrived with red eyes and folded programs. He learned the subtle rhythms of caregivers guiding wheelchairs over seams in the path, of teachers quieting students with a look instead of a command, of old soldiers removing caps the same way every time, as if rehearsing respect kept their own hands steady. He also learned that entitlement wandered into sacred spaces wearing many uniforms, expensive suits, official credentials, donor badges, media lanyards. Most corrected course when checked. Some did not. Victor Sloan had built a national reputation, buying speed where institutions moved slowly. His company sold defense technology. His philanthropy funded memorial projects, and his name appeared on plaques in capitals carved with gratitude. He traveled with counsel, cameras, and assumptions. The sharp visual detail everyone noticed first was the cufflinks. Brushed silver set with dark stone, small and costly and impossible to miss when he pointed at people. He believed process existed to serve outcomes he approved. He believed money translated into rank. On ordinary days, those beliefs got him through doors. Arlington was not an ordinary day. As the lane tightened and the SUV idled near Whitaker's fresh stone, Jack's face remained the same mask of discipline the crowd had watched all morning. Inside, his instincts were on high alert, a skill forged in steel and fire, now applied to marble and mourning. He tracked the girl in navy, the angle of the front tire, the position of the driver's right foot, the legal aid's phone held up in performative confidence, the videographer seeking dramatic footage, and finding instead a line he did not yet understand he had crossed. No one there, not the students, not the tourists, not even Sloan, could fully see what that one engraved surname had just done inside the sentinel walking his measured line. Jack took another step, then another. The cadence held, but the next decision was coming. He took the next step without breaking cadence, and Arlington answered him with the same hard click of leather on stone that had measured honor for generations. The hill sat under a sharpened autumn sky now, the mist lifting in torn bands that drifted between markers and vanished in the sun, while the flag above the terrace snapped in disciplined intervals like a command punctuating the morning. The black SUVs remained idling where they did not belong, glossy panels reflecting white headstones in distorted lines. But the older geometry of the cemetery held stronger than chrome and tinted glass. Rows of marble stood in exact procession over the slope, each stone aligned to a discipline that no donor, no title, and no camera could amend. The crowd had thickened by increments, not with spectacle seekers, but with witnesses who understood they were standing at a boundary. 2 Army retirees in pressed windbreakers had moved to the rail and removed their caps at the same moment. Their gestures so synchronized, it looked rehearsed by years of shared ceremony. A middle-aged woman with a folded burial program and trembling hands stood beside a teenage boy in a JROTC jacket. He had straightened his posture unconsciously, matching Jack's bearing as closely as his young frame could manage. A father in work boots stood with a daughter perched at his side, whispering short explanations she barely heard because her attention stayed fixed on the sentinel's movement. Near the lower lane, the hospice nurse remained beside the wheelchair she had guided earlier, on one hand steady on the handle, the other pressed flat over her own heart. Emma Whitaker did not move from her place beside the older woman. Her navy coat was buttoned to the throat, her white ribbons flickering in the wind, the folded cards now softened at the corners where her fingers gripped them. She watched Jack's turn point with a concentration rare in children, as though she had found in those steps a language sturdy enough to hold what she could not say aloud. The woman beside her, Daniel Whitaker's mother, kept her chin high even as grief worked through the muscles of her face. Her eyes moved from the engraved surname on fresh marble to Jack's white gloves and back again, reading in silence what others around her could only feel. By 6:12 a.m., even the tourists understood this was no routine delay. High school students who had arrived with half-muted chatter now stood in disciplined quiet, phones at their sides, lenses pointed at nothing. A veteran with a cane, jacket collar pinned with campaign ribbons faded by decades, shifted his weight forward and planted the cane tip against the walkway like a stake in ground he refused to surrender. A chaplain in black kept his hands clasped at waist level, mouth set in a line that carried pastoral patience and soldierly steel in equal measure. Not far from him, the cemetery attendant in green held his position near the lane, shoulders tight, waiting for instruction from authority that had not yet stepped in, but was already unmistakably present in the sentinel's bearing. Jack's uniform read like doctrine made visible. His coat sat square across his chest, seams straight, brass bright but not showy, each line tuned to regulation, with a severity that denied vanity and honored craft. His white gloves were unmarked, cuff edges level, fingers wrapped around the M14 with ritual precision that came from thousands of repetitions drilled until motion and meaning became one thing. The kepi hat remained at exact angle despite the gusting wind, chin level, jaw set, eyes fixed at the prescribed point, and still collecting the full field through trained peripheral awareness. His trousers fell in clean lines over boots polished to mirror shine. In those polished surfaces, the world around him appeared in warped fragments, flag, faces, marble, sky, held together in movement. To strangers, he looked ceremonial. To soldiers in the crowd, he looked operational. He completed another 21 and turned on the heel, the pivot crisp enough to draw a soft gasp from somewhere near the rail. The sound faded at once. No one clapped. No one called out. The quiet had changed shape, no longer only reverent but braced, like a unit waiting for the command that would separate restraint from intervention. The SUV's engines hummed against that silence with mechanical arrogance, and the contrast was stark. Machine impatience against human discipline, money's momentum against memory's law. Sloan stood near his front quarter panel, cufflinks flashing when he moved his hand, still occupying space as if status itself were authorization. His videographer had lowered the camera slightly, uncertain now whether he was documenting a donor event or a public mistake. Jack kept moving, and as he moved, the hill kept revealing itself in detail sharp enough to cut thought into focus. The faint scent of damp grass warming under sunlight, the mineral chill that rose from marble, distant bell notes from another section carrying over the slope, the subtle vibration through stone each time his heels struck a turn. Arlington was never static. It breathed in rituals, in weather, in footsteps, in names spoken and unspoken. This place where history was not archived but inhabited asked one thing from the living: hold the line with dignity. Jack had built his life around that request. He had not always worn blue wool and white gloves. Years before the tomb, years before this hill and its disciplined silence, he had learned to read terrain under different skies. He had learned it first in eastern Afghanistan, where dust found every seam in a uniform and heat bent distance into deception. As a young infantryman on his first deployment, he had discovered that fear was rarely loud. It often arrived as concentration, so complete it burned away everything but immediate tasks. Arc, cover, radio check, buddy position, route to exfil. He was strong then, quick, eager to prove himself, but raw in the way young soldiers often are, believing endurance was mostly physical. Experience taught him endurance had a moral dimension too, staying steady for others when your own pulse was hammering. His second Afghanistan tour hardened that lesson. Outside Kunduz, during a dawn extraction under layered contact, a secondary blast threw metal and dirt across a narrow wadi where his squad was moving a wounded specialist. A shard scored along Jack's jaw and tore through his comms earpiece, leaving his right ear ringing with a high metallic tone that still visited him in quiet rooms. He finished the carry anyway, shoulder locked under the specialist's weight, boots slipping in loose stone, while Staff Sergeant Daniel Whitaker covered the exposed angle and shouted corrections through dust thick enough to taste. When the bird finally lifted, medics called Jack fortunate. He nodded because there was work to do. Later, in the dim light of a field dressing station, he touched the fresh sutures and understood fortune had little to do with it. Men got home because other men decided, in one exact second, to absorb risk first. Syria came after Afghanistan, a different map and the same underlying math. Long nights, fractured streets, quick decisions made with incomplete information and permanent consequences. Jack served as team leader there. Older by only a few years, but older in all the ways that counted, carrying younger soldiers through uncertainty. With calm, he had earned the hard way. He brought all of them home from that rotation. He did not call it heroism. He called it duty properly executed. His Bronze Star citation later used language about valor under fire. Jack accepted the medal, then stored it in a plain case out of sight, because in his accounting system, commendation always pointed backward to names that no longer stood in formation. Daniel Whitaker remained the largest of those names. Whitaker had been the kind of squad leader who could enforce standards at dawn and still have the men laughing by chow, a broad-shouldered Kansan with sun-lined eyes and a card shark's confidence, unsupported by results. He carried a weathered deck in a cargo pocket and claimed every loss was strategic. During one rain-locked evening at a temporary outpost, after generator power dropped and everyone sat in half-dark eating crackers from MRE sleeves, Whitaker slapped the cards against his helmet and said, "If we make it home, first round's on me, and you're still terrible at cards." The team laughed hard enough to forget, for 1 minute, where they were. Jack had answered that he only lost to keep Whitaker humble. Whitaker grinned and declared that service to leadership would go in Jack's evaluation report. That was his gift. He made humor an instrument of cohesion, not escape, and in doing so, he kept men human in places designed to strip humanity away. Hours later, in the jagged aftermath of an initial strike, a second blast hit from an angle no one had fully seen. Whitaker moved toward Jack and the younger specialist without hesitation, taking the exposed position and driving both men behind shattered cover. The sequence lasted seconds. Its consequence lasted forever. Jack remembered the pressure wave, remembered trying to reestablish comms through ringing ears, remembered Whitaker's hand on his vest in that last lucid interval, steady and firm despite everything. There was no speech that could contain that moment. There was only the brutal clarity that leadership had again meant absorbing the worst of it, so others could walk out. When Jack rotated home, the uniform changed, but the debt did not. He attended memorials. He visited families. He stood in back rows while names were read, and folded flags passed from gloved hands to shaking ones. The country moved forward at its ordinary pace. Markets opened, traffic lights changed, people argued about weather and weekends. Jack understood that normalcy was exactly what sacrifice purchased, and he did not resent it. He also understood how easily names could fade when life regained speed. That understanding became the axis of his next choice. He volunteered for the old guard and pursued tomb duty with the same rigor he had once applied to patrol briefs. Selection alone was demanding. Qualification was relentless. He accepted every correction, every repeated drill, every inspection, down to thread and shine, because the standard was the mission. At the tomb, discipline was not ornament but architecture, the visible framework holding national memory in public view. 21 steps were not merely counted, they were offered. The pause was not delay, it was respect given shape. The turn was not movement, it was renewal of vow. Jack embraced that structure because it gave him a way to keep faith not in abstraction, but in daily physical practice. So when he saw Whitaker etched in fresh marble that morning, the line between public duty and private grief did not blur, it fused. He was not only a sentinel on assignment. He was a man guarding the final honor of the soldier who had once stepped into danger first, so he could step at all. The crowd around him saw composure, and composure was real. Beneath it, memory stood at attention. He reached 21 again. Halt, turn, return. The cadence held the hill steady while sunlight climbed higher across the white stones, and every witness present, veteran, child, nurse, chaplain, student, mother, daughter, stood inside the gravity of one truth Jack had carried from war to Arlington. Names endure only if someone guards them. Names endure only if someone guards them. And Victor Sloan had built an empire on the belief that names endured because someone paid for them. He stood beside the lead SUV with his coat open against the wind, one hand on his hip, the other carving impatient lines through the air, every motion calibrated by a lifetime of doors opening early and procedures bending late. In boardrooms, he was praised as visionary, the man who turned battlefield software into contracts, contracts into foundations, and foundations into granite plaques engraved with gratitude. At airports, he never waited in the public line. At hospitals, his donations renamed wings. At museums, his assistants called ahead, and curators met him at private entrances. Arlington, in his mind, was another venue with cameras, optics, and a schedule. His team reinforced that illusion. The videographer stayed tight on his shoulder, lens hood tilted upward to catch flag and sunlight in the same frame. The legal aid kept one finger on a digital permit packet and spoke in low, clipped tones about media windows and approved access corridors, as if administrative language could dissolve sacred boundaries. The driver, a thick-necked man in mirrored sunglasses, watched Sloan in the rearview mirror for every signal. They moved like people accustomed to compliance. They had done this routine at ribbon cuttings, policy summits, veterans galas, and investor events where applause came before substance. None of them understood that the ground under their shoes rejected performance that did not carry reverence. Sloane glanced at Jack again and saw only ceremonial fabric, not service, not war, not loss, not oath. "You heard me," he called, voice sharp enough to carry to the upper rail. "Move the parade prop. I'm not delaying a national rollout because someone wants to march." His cufflinks flashed with each syllable, little bursts of polished arrogance against the morning light. The cemetery attendant stepped in, breathing hard, trying to hold formal tone. "Sir, you are in a restricted funeral lane. Back your vehicles out now." Sloane's expression did not change. "You can file your complaint after we finish." He flicked 2 fingers toward the driver again. "Advance 6 feet." The SUV rolled forward exactly 6 feet. That precision, obedient and mechanical, made the violation worse. It was not chaos. It was chosen. At 6:13 a.m., 2 more visitors stopped at the edge of the lane and did what everyone had begun doing without instruction. They went silent and watched Jack. A retired Air Force master sergeant with a hearing aid clicked off his phone mid-ring and slipped it into his pocket. A woman in a black blazer, likely from a burial office farther down the grounds, pressed her badge against her chest and stood still as stone. The crowd had become a nation in miniature. Veterans and children and workers and mourners gathered in one narrowing corridor, witnessing a man of purchased influence test himself against the tradition he had mistaken for decoration. Jack reached his turn point and pivoted, white glove and rifle moving in perfect sequence. His face held the same disciplined stillness, but he had already profiled the entire opposing formation the way he once profiled compounds at first light. Principal, driver, legal buffer, media capture, vehicle momentum, civilian density, potential panic vectors. He tracked the lead tire's path in relation to Whitaker's fresh stone and the low curb where Emma stood. He noted the driver's foot pressure through subtle engine pitch changes. He logged each command Sloane gave, each witness in earshot, each camera angle. Beneath the kepi hat, his mind ran layered calculations in clean military order. Sloane took 3 steps closer to the lane and lowered his voice just enough to sound controlled, just enough to be more insulting. "Soldier, you are blocking authorized movement. Step aside and keep your ceremony over there." Jack did not answer. Protocol held. Sloane's lip curled. "Unbelievable." A whisper rose from the crowd, fragmented and angry. "He called him a prop." "Not here." "Does he know whose burial this is?" Emma looked up at her grandmother, then back to the SUV, then back to Jack, trying to triangulate safety from adult faces that had suddenly gone tight. Her folded program card shook once in her hands. Daniel Whitaker's mother touched the child's shoulder and drew her half a step back from the lane, but grief and pride had narrowed her own attention. She stayed fixed on her son's name cut into new marble. Sloane's background had trained him to read hesitation as leverage. In negotiations, he watched for micropauses, then drove through them with escalating demands until the other side surrendered on pace alone. He used the same tactic now. "If no one here can make a decision," he said, loud enough for his camera to catch it, "I'll make one." He turned to the driver. "Keep moving, slow. Don't stop unless someone physically blocks you." That sentence was his fatal assumption. Made plain, he believed discipline meant passivity, that a sentinel's restraint was weakness, and that sacred protocol would yield to the theater of momentum. The driver nodded and eased off the brake. The SUV crept forward at walking speed, grille now aligned with the narrowest section of lane, where mourners had clustered near Whitaker's headstone. The engine hummed low, predatory and patient. The videographer shifted position for a better shot and accidentally framed Emma in the corner of his monitor, a child in navy beside fresh marble and moving chrome. He lowered the camera by 2 inches, unsettled, then raised it again because habit overruled conscience. Jack's boots clicked through another pass, rhythm unbroken. To the crowd, he remained unreadable, his uniform immaculate, his cadence unflinching. Inside, every system was live. He felt the cold through leather soles, the slight vibration of idling engines through stone, the pressure of strap and stock against his glove, the old ringing in his right ear sharpening under stress. He cataloged all of it and gave nothing away. Combat had taught him that composure was not the absence of urgency. Composure was urgency harnessed. 2 rows up, one of the elderly Marines spoke without taking his eyes off Jack. "He sees all of it." His friend answered softly, "Yes. Wait." The crowd obeyed that unwritten command. No one rushed the lane. No one shouted Sloan down. Their restraint was not surrender. It was trust in the sentinel at the center of the field. Sloan mistook their silence for consent. He adjusted his cuffs and addressed his legal aid. "Document this. We had clear pre-approval and were obstructed by ceremonial personnel." He tilted his chin toward Jack as if presenting evidence. "I'm done being delayed by pageantry." The aide hesitated, eyes moving from the tablet to Emma to the headstone to Jack. "Sir, this appears to be an active military interment route." Sloan gave her a flat look. "Everything is active somewhere. We proceed." Wind snapped the flag hard above them. The sound cracked across the lane like a warning shot. Jack completed another turn. In peripheral vision, he saw Emma shift her weight forward, one shoe edging off the curb as she tried to see around the SUV's hood. He saw her grandmother reach, half a heartbeat late. He measured distance. Child to tire to curb, curb to him. 8 yards, then 7.5 as the vehicle crept. 90 seconds later, the lane had tightened to a single moral choice. Time elongated. Every second seemed poured, not passed. A father near the rail lifted his daughter into his arms and stepped back 3 paces. The hospice nurse guided the wheelchair farther from the lane, wheels whispering over stone seams. The chaplain moved to the edge of the path, ready but disciplined, hands still clasped. High school students who had come to observe history now stood with faces pale and rigid, phones forgotten at their sides. The retired master sergeant with the hearing aid removed his cap and held it to his chest, jaw clenched so tight the tendons stood out. The driver kept coming, foot feathering the accelerator in tiny pulses. He was watching Sloan in the mirror more than the lane ahead. Jack's internal state narrowed to a combat corridor. He ran threat geometry in stacked layers. Vehicle speed low but non-zero. Civilian unpredictability high. Emotional volatility rising in the crowd. Command authority contested by ego. Ceremonial boundary approaching operational breach threshold. He remembered route clearance briefings in Syria, where one parked truck could become a catastrophe if allowed too close. He remembered Whitaker's hand on his vest, steering him behind cover in the split second that separated survival from mourning. He remembered the promise he had never spoken publicly, because promises like that were carried, not advertised. Externally, he remained stillness in motion. 21 steps, pause, turn. 21 steps. Sloan raised his voice again, irritated now that the sentinel still had not acknowledged him. "Do you understand English, soldier? Move." Jack's eyes stayed locked on the prescribed point, but his awareness now held only 3 anchors. Whitaker's name, Emma's position, the advancing grill. A grounds worker whispered, "Please stop the car." No response. The SUV's front tire reached the paint line at the lane's inner edge. Emma, trying to keep hold of her cards and her grandmother's sleeve at once, stumbled one step toward the curb and dropped a program booklet. It fluttered down onto the stone just ahead of the tire. Gasps broke across the crowd in one collective intake. Jack's pulse did not spike. It sharpened. In training at the tomb, protocol was law. In war, protection was law. In that lane, with a child at the edge of motion, and Daniel Whitaker's name cut into fresh marble 10 feet away, those two laws collided inside him with the force of old artillery. He reached his turn point. Halt. For the first time that morning, his center of gravity shifted off ceremonial autopilot and onto decisive intent. Every muscle coiled, every instinct firing, every consequence accepted in advance. The rifle remained steady. The white gloves remained clean. His face stayed carved from discipline, while the world around him held its breath, waiting to see whether the sentinel would remain statue or become shield. He chose shield. Jack stepped off the ceremonial mat in one clean motion that looked almost gentle, until its meaning landed on everyone watching. The breach of protocol was only a single stride, but at Arlington, a single stride carried the weight of a thunderclap. His left boot struck stone between Emma and the advancing grill. His right boot followed and locked. The rifle stayed vertical and controlled against his shoulder, white-gloved left hand rising, palm out, fingers level, command made flesh. The SUV rolled another inch and stopped so close that heat from the engine brushed the dark wool of his coat. The lane went silent enough to hear fabric move. Sloan blinked as if the scene had refused a script he had already approved. "I said move." Jack's face did not change. The scar along his jaw looked pale as marble in the hard morning light. He spoke once, voice measured, low, and carrying farther than a shout. "This lane carries Staff Sergeant Daniel Whitaker's final journey. You will not move." The words cut through the hill with formal precision, not theatrical anger, and that made them heavier. They named the dead. They named the line. They named the authority that money had failed to read. Emma's grandmother drew the girl fully behind her without taking her eyes off Jack. The dropped program booklet trembled in the breeze beside the tire, untouched. The driver glanced to Sloan in the mirror, waiting for the next command. Sloan gave none. Jack held his hand in place, elbow locked, posture absolute, a sentinel transformed from ritual to interdiction without losing one grain of discipline. To the tourists and students, it looked like stillness. To the veterans, it looked like a man who had already counted every possible consequence and accepted them. 10 seconds passed. 15. At 20, the engine noise suddenly felt indecent. A mechanical growl in a place built for names and silence. The videographer lowered his camera. He raised it again, then lowered it for good, because the lens had become a witness to something that no longer belonged to his client. Near the rail, one of the elderly Marines exhaled through his nose and whispered, "That's a line in the sand." His friend answered, "No, in stone." Sloan recovered enough to posture. "You are obstructing authorized movement. I have credentials on file." Jack did not look at him. His gaze remained fixed through the windshield on the driver, on the foot still hovering near the accelerator. "Engine off." The driver hesitated, hands tightening around the wheel. Jack repeated, same tone, same cadence. "Engine off." That was the moment the hierarchy changed. Not because volume changed, because certainty did. The driver turned the key. The SUV shuddered once and fell quiet. A ripple moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Not cheers, never cheers here, but the release of held breath after prolonged strain. Emma bent from behind her grandmother's coat, eyes wide, looking at Jack's raised hand as if memorizing it. By 6:14 a.m., sunlight had climbed high enough to throw hard edges under every stone, and the scene seemed carved in relief. Child and grandmother by fresh marble, black vehicle halted at the boundary, billionaire donor standing in polished shoes, sentinel in full dress blues holding a lane for the dead with one white glove and one sentence. Sloan took a step forward, jaw tight. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Jack lowered his hand slowly and returned it to the rifle stock. "Yes," he said. "You are interfering with a military burial route." No insult, no extra word, just record language, clean and enforceable. The legal aide looked down at her tablet, then up at the headstone, then toward the cemetery attendant as if searching for a procedural bridge back to dignity. She did not find one. The attendant had already keyed his radio 2 minutes earlier, thumb pressed hard enough to whiten the knuckle, transmitting an interference code and location. The outcome of that call now approached from the upper access road in the form of 2 Arlington security vehicles and 1 staff sedan with a single star plate mounted on the front. The first siren chirped once and cut off. Every head turned uphill. Brigadier General Nora Hale stepped out before the sedan fully settled, cap in hand, overcoat open, service ribbons bright against winter-weight green. She was compact, hard-eyed, and moving with the velocity of someone who had already read the facts and arrived for execution, not debate. 2 Arlington security officers and a military police sergeant flanked her, stopping at the lane edge while she took in the full geometry in one sweep. Halted SUV, displaced sentinel, fresh Whitaker stone, grieving family, donor convoy, witnesses everywhere, her voice carried with parade ground clarity. "Who ordered vehicle movement in an active burial lane?" No one answered. She looked at Jack first. "Sergeant Chen, report." Jack came to formal attention where he stood, still between grill and mourners. "Ma'am, at approximately 0613, civilian convoy entered restricted funeral route against attendant direction. Driver advanced on command from Mr. Victor Sloan. Child and family of Staff Sergeant Whitaker were within hazard line. I stepped off ceremonial mark to halt vehicle and secure route." Hale nodded once, crisp. "Any contact?" "No, ma'am." "Engine status?" "Off, ma'am." She shifted her gaze to Sloan. "Mr. Sloan, is that report inaccurate?" Sloan lifted his chin. "General, this is a misunderstanding. We had media authorization, and your soldier escalated the situation in front of my team." Hale did not blink. "He is not my soldier in that sentence. He is a United States Army sentinel on duty at Arlington National Cemetery, and he prevented your vehicle from crossing an active interment corridor." She extended her hand toward the MP sergeant. "Credential packet." The sergeant passed a slim folder. Hale opened it, scanned one page, then closed it with deliberate care. "Your media access letter authorizes static filming at designated Overlook B. It does not authorize vehicle entry into restricted funeral lanes. It explicitly prohibits interference with ceremonies and family movement." Sloan spread both hands, performing reasonableness for every camera still pointed his way. "Then your staff communicated poorly." Hale's tone cooled another degree. "My staff communicated clearly. You ignored them." The legal aide stepped in, voice tight. "General Hale, perhaps we can relocate and discuss this privately." Hale turned to her. "No. The violation occurred publicly, in front of bereaved family and military honors. The correction will remain public." The words struck like a gavel. Students at the rail stood straighter. The veteran with the cane removed his cap and held it against his chest. Emma watched Hale, then Jack, then her father's Stone, following the chain of adults who were finally speaking the same moral language. Hale looked back to Sloane. Under federal regulations governing national military cemeteries, interference with authorized funeral operations, and refusal to comply with cemetery officials are actionable offenses. Effective immediately, your cemetery access credentials are revoked pending formal review. Your convoy will exit under escort. Your equipment team will surrender all route footage to security for evidentiary preservation. Sloane's expression cracked for the first time. You can't do this on impulse. Hale answered without raising her voice. This is not impulse. This is jurisdiction. She nodded to the security officers. Escort all non-family civilians associated with this convoy to the south gate. Document identities, vehicle plates, timestamps, preserve body cam, and fixed camera pulls from 0610 forward. The officers moved at once. One approached the driver and gestured him out for identification. The other extended a hand toward the videographer, who surrendered his media cards with visible relief, as if handing over weight he no longer wished to carry. The MP sergeant asked the legal aid for her pass. She provided it without argument. Sloane remained still for 1 second too long, then offered his credential sleeve with controlled anger that fooled no one. 30 seconds later, the convoy had become an escorted column heading away from Whitaker's section. Engines restarting only when directed, wheels turning carefully off the lane they should never have touched. No one in the crowd jeered. Arlington did not trade in humiliation for sport. What remained was more severe. Consequence witnessed in silence. Hale waited until the last SUV cleared the bend, then faced Jack again. Sergeant Chen. Ma'am. You stepped off mark. Yes, ma'am. Why? Jack's answer was immediate. To prevent civilian hazard and protect Staff Sergeant Whitaker's burial route. Hale held his gaze for a long moment. Correct decision, correct restraint, file written statement at end of watch. Yes, ma'am. She shifted 1 step toward Emma and her grandmother, removed her cap, and bowed her head briefly toward the stone. Mrs. Whitaker, Emma. On behalf of the Army, I am sorry for the disruption. It will not happen again. Emma's grandmother managed a single nod, tears bright but controlled. Emma lifted her small hand in a careful salute, uncertain but earnest. Jack saw it in peripheral vision, and for the first time since stepping off the mat, a fraction of warmth moved behind his disciplined expression. He returned a precise salute to the child, then lowered his hand and waited. Hale replaced her cap. Sergeant Chen, resume post. He stepped backward from the lane, one measured stride at a time, returning to the ceremonial path he had left only once and for cause. At the mat edge, he turned, reset his bearing, and began again. Boots on stone, cadence restored. 21 steps, pause, turn, repeat. The crowd did not speak. They watched him move past Whitaker's name and the place where the tire had stopped, watched duty fold rupture back into order without erasing what had been defended. By 6:19 a.m., the flag above the slopes snapped in clean intervals, the morning wind carrying the scent of cold grass and cut earth, and Arlington returned to its stern, sacred rhythm, while Jack Chen kept faith with the unknown and the named alike. Jack's boots struck marble again, and the sound restored order faster than any siren could. 21 steps, pause, turn, repeat. The ritual did not erase what had happened. It absorbed it, giving the morning a structure strong enough to hold outrage, grief, and relief in the same disciplined frame. The crowd remained motionless through his first full cycle after the convoy departed, as if everyone needed to witness one complete pass before trusting that the sacred rhythm had truly returned. General Hale did not leave. She stood at the lane edge with the MP sergeant and Arlington security, while the cemetery attendant, still breathing hard, delivered his radio log from memory with the precision of a man determined never to lose a single detail. Time, vehicle count, plate numbers, verbal commands, refusal points. The MP sergeant repeated each line back, then read the incident number aloud so every witness within earshot understood this would not be buried under influence or delay. Near Whitaker's headstone, Emma's dropped booklet still lay where the wind had nudged it against the curb. Her grandmother took a step toward it, but Hale reached it first, bent carefully, and lifted it with both hands the way one lifts a folded flag. She knelt to Emma's height and offered it back without ceremony, only respect. "This belongs with you." Emma accepted it against her chest, eyes bright, chin firm, then whispered, "Yes, ma'am." The grandmother pressed a shaking hand to Hale's forearm once, a silent thank you that carried more weight than speech. By 6:27 a.m., the first formal callback came through the attendant's radio from dispatch control. Interference code confirmed, federal property enforcement notified, escort exit completed at South Gate with no secondary disruptions. The attendant closed his eyes briefly at the transmission, then acknowledged in a clear voice and read the closure back word for word. That call had started as a plea for help under pressure. It ended as a documented chain of consequence. At the rail, the witnesses began to breathe again in ordinary rhythms. A teenage boy in the JROTC jacket whispered to his teacher, "He never yelled." The teacher answered, "He didn't need to." The hospice nurse guided her wheelchair forward 2 feet to restore the lane's flow, then stopped and faced Jack's path with her hand over her heart. The two elderly Marines exchanged a look that needed no translation. One of them removed his cap and held it at his side until Jack completed another turn, then settled it back only after the sentinel passed. Sloane's legal aid paused by security near the outer walkway while identification was finalized, turned once toward Whitaker's family with a face stripped of courtroom confidence. Her mouth parted as if an apology was coming. Nothing did. She lowered her gaze and continued walking under escort. The videographer followed, camera powered down, shoulders bent. Before reaching the gate vehicle, he signed the evidence receipt for his media cards and route footage, then handed over the drive from his pocket without argument. The chain of custody bag clicked shut. That thread, like the lane itself, was now secured. Jack kept moving. His expression did not change, but the pressure behind his sternum shifted from combat readiness to something older and heavier, the ache of fulfilled debt. He passed Whitaker, D on each return line, and did not look directly, because the ritual required his eyes forward. He did not need to look. The name was mapped into him. In that measured cadence, he felt 2 timelines walking together. The young specialist he had once been, stumbling through smoke behind a squad leader who refused to leave anyone exposed, and the sentinel he had become, keeping that same leader's final ground clear with white gloves and polished boots. At 6:34 a.m., the MP sergeant approached Hale with a clipboard and the confiscated credential sleeves sealed in a transparent evidence envelope. Hale signed the preliminary seizure form, then handed it to the cemetery superintendent, who had just arrived at a brisk, controlled pace. "Access revoked pending federal review," she said. "No discretionary reinstatement from donor office channels." The superintendent gave a tight nod. "Understood, ma'am. We'll issue written notice before noon." No one in that exchange spoke Sloane's name again. The jurisdiction had already answered him. The strange details of the morning remained visible to anyone who cared to see them. A single compressed tire track scarred the damp edge near Whitaker's section. dark against the grass like a bruise on sacred fabric. Distorted reflections of white stones still shimmered across the SUV's fading path where moisture had marked the pavement. Jack's right ear rang once in a thin metallic pulse when the wind snapped the flag hard above him. A ghost note from another war, then steadied as he exhaled through the next turn. Nothing was forgotten. Everything was accounted for. Hale waited until Jack reached his far pivot before speaking softly to the chaplain. "Family supported." The chaplain nodded. "Yes, General. We'll keep them with us through the full honors and departure." Hale glanced toward Emma and her grandmother. "Ensure they have direct contact if they need records or assistance after today." The chaplain touched the inside pocket of his coat. "Already written." Another thread tied down cleanly. When Jack's watch reached its final scheduled minutes, relief approached from the north path in identical dress blues, rifle held with the same disciplined geometry. The transfer was executed by regulation, no flourish, no break in bearing. Jack stepped off only when relieved, and even then his movement carried ceremonial gravity. To most of the crowd, he remained a figure carved from duty. To those who had watched the lane, he had become something more legible. Not a symbol pretending to strength, but strength choosing restraint until restraint could no longer protect the living and the dead together. He was halfway to the operations office when he heard small shoes on stone behind him and halted at once, turning only after he was clear of active ceremonial lines. Emma stood with her grandmother and the chaplain a respectful distance back, program booklet still clutched in both hands. She looked up at him with the solemn concentration of a child trying to perform adulthood correctly. Her right hand rose in a careful salute, elbow a little low, fingers slightly uneven. "Thank you, Sergeant Chen." Jack returned the salute at full precision, holding it long enough for her to feel it was real, not indulgent. "Your father led from the front," he said. "It was an honor to stand this lane for him." Emma nodded once, lips pressed tight, then stepped back to her grandmother's side. The older woman met Jack's eyes and spoke in a voice worn thin by grief but steady with pride. "He used to talk about you. Said you were stubborn in all the right ways." For the first time all morning, a faint line of human warmth touched Jack's face. "He was right about many things, ma'am." Inside the operations office, fluorescent light replaced dawn silver. Jack removed his gloves, set them flat beside the incident form, and wrote his statement in clean block letters, each sentence stripped to fact. Time, location, commands heard, child's position, vehicle movement, protocol breach, de-escalation orders, engine shutdown. He attached the attendant's incident number and signed at the bottom with date and watch designation. Hale entered halfway through, reviewed the draft without interrupting, and placed her initials in the margin. "Accurate," she said. "This will stand." She paused, then added, "Sergeant, discipline under pressure is the standard. Today you honored it." Jack answered the only way he knew. "Ma'am?" By 7:18 a.m., the report packet had been transmitted to Cemetery Command, Provost Records, and Federal Property Enforcement Liaison, with body cam and fixed camera timestamps cross-referenced to the attendant's radio log and the seized media drives. No loose ends remained in paperwork, evidence, or witness chain. The system had done what it existed to do when sacred ground was tested. It had remembered precisely. An hour later, Jack returned to the plaza in full uniform for the next rotation window. The crowd had thinned, but not emptied. The veteran in the heavy tan coat still stood near the rail, cap in both hands, waiting as if he had unfinished business with silence itself. When Jack took his mark and the first boot struck marble, the veteran lifted the cap to his chest and held it there through the entire pass. No speech, no performance, Just one old soldier recognizing another kind of watch. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning mist. White headstones stretched over the hillside in unwavering rows, each one a sentinel of memory. The flag above them snapped and settled, answering the cadence below. Jack moved through the ritual with renewed exactness, every crease sharp, every motion deliberate, every turn a vow kept in public. He passed Whitaker's line again and again while families visited. Named stones and strangers paused at unknown ones, and in that shared stillness the moral truth stood plain without needing to be announced. Honor was never purchased, only carried. 21 steps. Pause, turn, repeat. Boots on marble, wind over grass, rows of white sentinels under a steady flag. The sacred held.